Hello and welcome to a Miss B Writes podcast. This month I speak to historian Onyeka, author of Blackamoores, Africans in Tudor England, their present status and origins. Onyeka's research spans more than a decade, during which time he's gathered evidence to dispel the widely held belief that Africans only came to Britain as slaves. He talks to Miss B about the free noble men and women and skilled artisans from across the African continent who were critical in shaping modern Britain. You know, normally when you have migration, you'll have black people coming to London. And it's interesting that you talk about certain areas like Devon. I mean, normally you stick with those you know.
Oh, that's a good point.
Okay.
Yes, and one of the areas that I've been focusing on. So in the 16th century, the first thing is that the principal towns and cities are not the same principal cities and towns that now exist. The towns and cities that we now have, large cities and towns, come about from the Industrial Revolution, the second phase of the Industrial Revolution. So cities like Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, right? These are cities that have grown recently over the last sort of 100 or 200 years because of the second phase of the Industrial Revolution. And because of the manufacturing industry, the heavy industries of coal, iron and steel industries, shipbuilding industries. When you go to the 16th century, you find principal towns and cities: London, Bristol, Plymouth, Nottingham, Norwich, Derby, right? And in those cities and towns you find an African presence, because Manchester was a village, Liverpool was a very tiny place, Birmingham a very small place, Bolton, small places, Sheffield, tiny places. So these places were not. Having said that, we are uncovering more and more each day. And even though I haven't found yet a strong African presence in the 16th century in Birmingham, doesn't mean that there weren't Africans there. I just haven't found it yet. But we have found it in Derby, not just around the corner. Yeah, we have found it in Nottingham. Yeah, we have found it in London. We have found it in Bristol. We have found it in Plymouth, in Exeter, in Norwich, in Lowestoft, in Hatherley, in Devon, Hatherley, yes, in Holt, in Worcestershire, in all different places, little villages, little tiny little villages. In Hatherley, there's a whole family, single black woman, right, and 4 or 5 illegitimate children, 3 or 4 of them that die, and then she disappears from the records in a little tiny place, Hatherley. In Holt, we find a sustainable black family that becomes white and whose modern day descendants are white. Henry Anthony Jetto. He comes individually, produces children with a white woman called Placidia. Those children, about 8 or 9 children they have, those children have children, about another 30 or 40 grandchildren, all of whom are his grandchildren, and then they multiply. So that in Holt in Worcestershire we see a large percentage of Holt having that African descendant as an ancestor.
Wow.
That's a very rural area. So often when we're looking to find in the 16th century, we shouldn't look for the places that we would now look.
It's all going back to this idea of contextualizing.
Certainly it is. Certainly it is, right? And often, like we say, we place 21st century prejudices upon the 16th century. And I know why we do that, but yeah, it's not helpful. So market town, market villages, ports, we see a strong African presence. In Bristol, in Plymouth, very strong, interesting presence in Plymouth and Bristol. The largest concentration is in London, in the St Botolph area near Bishopsgate, Liverpool Street, and around Peter the Paw's parish. Second largest, St Andrews in Plymouth, in the centre of Plymouth, second largest concentration. Third largest, St Olave and Hart Street, also in London, and then the fourth largest is Bristol. So in the centre of Bristol. So there is a Jack Black of Yisselmill, probably mispronounced it, also of Wales. And this Jack Black of the 18th century, his descendants are still present today. And as you said, some of them have got that hair. Walter Tull's brother descendants are still with us today, right? But there are a large number other people, mostly from the 18th century, and some of them, like I said, from the 17th and the 16th century, whose descendants are here with us today. People like Charles Moody, the head of the League of Coloured Persons, his descendants are still around. Charles Arundel Moody, and they became officers in the British Army, etc. Bamba Mullah, who was half Ethiopian, half English, who married the Indian prince from the Punjab. Yes, their descendants are still with us. So these people are still with us, and most of them will be classified as white.
Okay. Have you found that since doing this, you've built up a lot of connections in terms of the people that maybe you had to deal with to get?
Yes, but some of them don't want people to know about their background. They don't want people to know about for whatever reason. Others are more ambivalent. And one or two are actually very interested themselves. Henry Anthony Jetto's descendants are very, very interested. Yes, in this history. And when I contacted him, he said, I thought there was something like it.
Really? Interesting.
And he said not because I don't look
black,
but he didn't use the word coloured. He said colour. I don't look, but I thought there was something like that because I've been doing my own research, and I kept seeing this term Blackamoore in some of the older records, and I couldn't make sense of it. And I thought there was something like that. And there was just some other things which he wouldn't explain, that I just had strange inkling of it. So he had that notion in his mind, which made it easier for me to access it, and easier for me to then tell that story. Because if somebody doesn't want that story to be told, it's more difficult to tell it.